Good afternoon. I'm Bobby Mills. I'm Senior Advisor to the President of Daemen College. Today is truly a special day for us at Daemen College, not only for our athletic program and our student athletes, but for our entire college. Daemen College prides itself on its stellar reputation for combining athletics with an all-encompassing emphasis on academics. Today we have with us a Distinguished Leaders Lecture Series speaker who has made these same values the hallmark of his tenure as president of the NCAA. And at Daemen College, we are proud to have a president who serves with distinction on the NCAA Board of Governors and who never wavers from his support for college athletics in general and for Daemen student athletes in particular. Ladies and gentlemen, to introduce our Distinguished Leader Lecture Series speaker, it's my honor and privilege to turn the program over to our head Wildcat, the President of Daemen College, Dr. Gary Olson.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being with us today. Now, before I introduce today's distinguished leaders lecturer, Dr. Mark Emmert, President of the NCAA, I'd like to recognize several distinguished guests who are with us in the audience today. First, I'd like to recognize our friends from one of the finest law firms in all of New York, Harris Beach. The firm's been a real supporter of Daemen College and of this lecture series. Now, representing the firm are Tracy Lepardi and Brian Mahoney. So let's give them a round of applause. Also with us this afternoon are distinguished members of the Daemen College Board of Trustees, Caroline Burke and Paul Safran, as well as the Daemen College Community Advisory Board, Mark Chasin. So let's welcome them. Now, the Daemen College Auditorium is the Lumsden Auditorium, or gymnasium actually, and it's named after Charles and Gloria Lumsden, and we're delighted that Gloria Lumsden is here with us, and so let's especially give her. I'm happy, too, that our good friend and neighbor, Dr. Satish Tripathi, president of the University of Buffalo, is with us. And I'd also like to recognize several key elected officials who are great friends of Daemen College. Ed Rath, Erie County legislator, Dr. Barry Weinstein, the supervisor of the town of Amherst, Steve Sanders, board member from the town of Amherst. Also with us are 5 school superintendents, at least at last count. I think we have gained a few, and several high school principals from some of the Western New York's finest public school systems, as well as 9 public and private college and high school athletics directors, and we all know they do such an outstanding job every day for their student athletes, so let's give them a round of applause. Accompanying Dr. Emmert are 2 key NCAA officials, Division II Vice President Terry Steve Granow, and the Chief of Staff for Dr. Emmert, Carrie Vancinas. So let's give them a round of applause, too. And finally, I'd like to ask all of the Daemen College student athletes, both current and former, their coaches, the Director of Athletics, Bridget Nyland, and the great staff from our Division II Athletics Department to stand just to be recognized. So all of you from athletics. So. They're the main reason I think Dr. Emmert is with us today. Now, our speaker, Mark Emmert, has been president of the NCAA since October of 2010. And he led that organization to new heights of excellence in those almost 7 years. His focus has always been to push student athletes toward academic success while encouraging them to embrace the college experience. Now, his many initiatives have led to a 12% increase in the graduation rates among Division I student athletes, which, by the way, translates into 19,500 students who might not have completed their degrees without the reforms that he and his team have put through. And in Division II, our division, there's been a 12% increase in graduation rates for Hispanic student athletes and a 16% increase in graduation rates for women. And I should add that Daemen College is very proud to be the only Division II institution in the region, and we're proud to embrace Division II's philosophy of life in the balance. So that's the balance, healthy balance of academics and athletics, and it's so fitting for Daemen College. Now, prior to coming to NCAA, Dr. Emmert had a very distinguished career in higher education, including appointments as president of his alma mater, the University of Washington. He also served as chancellor of the Louisiana State University, as provost and chancellor of my alma mater, the University of Connecticut, provost and vice president for academic affairs at Montana State University, and Associate Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs at Dr. Worsham's alma mater, the University of Colorado. So he's earned a bachelor degree in political science from the University of Washington, a master's and a doctorate in public administration from that other high-quality private college in New York, Syracuse University. Just today, Daemen College awarded Dr. Emmert our highest honor, the President's Medal of Honor. And we could not be more honored to have him here on campus with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome my friend and today's Distinguished Leaders Lecturer, Dr. Mark Emmert.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Gary. And to the entire community, I want to thank you for the really gracious hospitality I've already seen here today. I've been in Buffalo before, most recently when we were having one of our NCAA men's championship events here, but for men's basketball. But I hadn't been on campus, and it's been a real pleasure. I got to spend a lot of time with students this afternoon, or this morning rather, and had lunch with the president and a number of supporters of the university and leaders of the community. And it's been really delightful to see the great pride and enthusiasm that the campus community has for what you're accomplishing here and for the leadership of the university. It's a great pleasure for me. And thank you very, very much again for the wonderful honor of the University Medal. It's a great pleasure for me. I want to do the following, if I may. I'd like to talk for a little bit of time about college sport in America and what the NCAA and college sport is about today, bring it up to date, and then hopefully leave a sufficient amount of time to take questions that you might have on anything that's going on in college sport, whether they're issues that I'm going to discuss or other things is fine. But I need you, first of all, to, I guess, suspend your imagination for just a minute. Because you have to think about something that's a little odd for us Americans. And that is that college sport is not a universal phenomenon. We have a hard time thinking about intercollegiate athletics. We have a hard time thinking about higher education in America without thinking about sport. You just think about the quintessential collegiate experience in the United States. It doesn't matter whether it's a small liberal arts college or a great big university, anything in between. You typically wind up describing that to someone. Sooner or later, you'll wind up talking about a sports program because it's ubiquitous. It's everywhere. It doesn't matter whether it's a Division I, II, or III school. Almost doesn't matter. Yes, there are certainly schools in America that don't have college sports programs, but they're in the minority, and indeed they're pretty darn rare. Now, if instead you went over to Europe or to Asia or to Latin America or to Africa, and you said to any counterpart of Dr. Olson's, another university or college president, tell me how your football team is doing, he or she would have no idea what you were talking about. If you drove around the towns in Europe, as I'm sure some of you have, or wandered around China or Japan or Argentina, and you were looking for bumper stickers that say, my son goes to school X, as does all my money, you wouldn't see that. You could look all over the place for a license plate bracket that says alumnus of, and you wouldn't find one of those. I always joke that if you are sitting in a cafe in Paris and you see some young person walk by with a sweatshirt that says Sorbonne on it, you just saw an American. Because a French kid would never think of doing that. They don't have that same connectivity to their university or their college. They go to the school that maybe had the academic programs that they wanted. More likely it was just sort of in the neighborhood and relatively close. They don't have any kind of the social cohesion that comes with American higher education. It's completely different, completely different. And part of that difference is that around, gosh, I don't know, 150 years ago now, a little more than that, I suppose, around just before the beginning of the Civil War, and more in particular after the end of the Civil War, American colleges and soon-to-be universities started doing something that the other schools didn't do. They started playing games. And Americans being Americans, we've always been a pretty competitive lot, and as soon as you start playing games on your campus, you have to play games against the next team, the school next door. And Americans being Americans, if you're going to do it, you're going to do it bigger and better than anybody else has ever done it. And you're going to make it as big a spectacle as you possibly can. And by the time you race into the 20th century, the beginnings of the 20th century, you wind up with an explosion of college sport. Schools are playing each other all over the place. Some of the biggest events that were going on in the United States at the turn of the last century were, in fact, college athletic events. It's hard to imagine today that you could get 50 or 100,000 people to go watch Yale play Harvard. That was a joke, but it doesn't seem to work. But in fact, that's what was going on. 80,000. Have you ever been? Any of you ever been to the Yale Bowl? So those of you that have been there, it seems anachronistic because you go to, I'm not picking on Yale, it's a fabulous university and they play perfectly reasonable football, but you go to the, I tried to recover there, didn't I? But you go to the Yale Bowl and you're sitting there with the 300 other people and you're watching a football game. There's about 5,000 out in the parking lot having cocktails, but you're sitting in a big, huge concrete arena built for 80,000 people. It's this huge bowl. It's predominantly empty. But at the turn of the last century, it was jammed. It was a hot ticket in town. Up in Chicago, over in Chicago, you could get 125,000 people to go to a college football game, the biggest events in America. The most interesting thing about that isn't just that, you know, it wasn't going on in the rest of the world. It was that it was exploding and becoming the dominant form of athletic engagement in the United States for these schools to play games. Now that was all fun and exciting and good, but there were a few problems with it. One of the problems was there were no rules. Indeed, schools would show up to play each other and they would invent the rules when they got there. The teams would get together and they would say, okay, what rules are we playing by? The whole notion of home rules, part of that comes out of this tradition where you sit down and say, okay, we're on the home field. What are your rules for playing whatever the game was? Football, let's say. Football was this interesting sport that emerged in 1869. It was the first game that was ever played in the United States. It's also the first game claimed as American soccer and American rugby, so that tells you a little bit of the identity crisis of the game. But by the time you get into the 20th century, this game has taken over America. Everybody loves this exciting game of football, except they had no way of making it all work. There's this famous, fascinating story about teams as early as the turn of the century who realized that in order to gain attention, especially in the Northeast, where sports had emerged, you had to go back to the Northeast and play those Northeasterners in their own games. So the University of Oregon, they load up their football team, they put them on trains, they come back to the Northeast and they decide that they're going to play, I think I have the sequence right, Cornell, and then Harvard, and then Yale. They get to Cornell, they show up to play Cornell, and the average age across from them on the team appears to be about 35. And they can tell from the language that none of them are college students, least of all Cornell students, and they physically beat the pulp out of them badly. And they thought, well, that wasn't really right and that wasn't fair. I don't know who those guys were, but they were not college students. That was okay, but they went down to Harvard and they played against the Harvard team lined up, and there were the same guys that had just beat them up in Cornell. And that would have been bad enough, but they went to the third venue, and there were the same guys to beat them up a third time. And it turned out the alumni of the three universities had gotten together, hired a bunch of guys off the docks in Boston to beat up the kids from Oregon. Because after all, there were no rules that said they couldn't do it. Indeed, when the Big Ten Conference was formed, one of the first of the major conferences ever to be formed, one of their very first rules was only 3 paid professionals on the team at a time, because there were no rules. Well, that would have been all funny and interesting, except for one other phenomenon. The game was utterly brutal. 1904, 19 boys are killed playing the game of football in the United States. Now, 19 doesn't seem like a lot, but let's extrapolate fast forward to now. There are probably 1,000-fold more kids playing football, probably more like 10,000-fold, but we'll stay at 1,000 than there was then. But even if it was just 100-fold, that would mean that 190 boys would have died this year playing football. Imagine how the country would have reacted if 190 kids, even 19, would have been killed this year playing the game of football. Well, the world reacted pretty much as you'd expect. There was massive call for the end of football and college sports in general. Most of the major newspapers in America were opining that this is something that has to end. They were making really interesting arguments that may sound familiar. They were saying, this has nothing to do with academics. Indeed, this is a distraction from academics. Why are we doing this? They said back then, this will sound humorous, but it was absolutely true, this has become too commercial, it's too much about money in 1905. They said, this is utterly unsafe. Kids are being hurt, they're getting concussions, they're getting injuries, they have no standards. Indeed, there was a famous incident where Rutgers played Princeton, and in the middle of a pile, somebody got knifed. Somebody carried a knife into the middle of a pile and stabbed somebody. This was not the gentleman's game that we'd like to think of from 100 years ago. And so they said, this is just brutal. It makes no sense. Charles Eliot, the president of Harvard, one of the most famous educators of all times, and one of the great university presidents, spent a huge portion of his career trying to kill college sports at Harvard, at his own institution. But somehow it lingered, and it wouldn't quite go away because the students loved playing the games, the alumni loved supporting the games, and everybody in the community thought it was a great thing to do. So, interesting fellow came along. This morning, so now I'm going to go up to the president. This morning, I had great pleasure. President and I, my staff, stopped by the inaugural home, the home of the inauguration of Teddy Roosevelt, which of course is here. After the assassination of McKinley, he becomes President of the United States. Among many things about Teddy Roosevelt, very fascinating guy, but Teddy Roosevelt loved sports. He thought it was a moment in time where there was actually an expression called masculine Christianity, this notion that being a physically fit person went along extremely well with all of the backbone of Americana, including this notion of being a rigorous person and being a disciplined person. And he thought that college sport and sports associated with schools in general was really important. And so as he watched what was going on in football, and he saw the newspapers, and he saw the flurry of people saying, we've got to stop college sports, he called a summit at the White House. He'd just become president just a year and a half earlier. And he called a summit, brought together presidents and football coaches. There were no such things as athletic directors at the time, just people that loved the game, some alumni leaders together. And he said, look, we have to fix this or we have to stop it. And so 65 university leaders, most of them from this region of the country, all came together and they said, look, we got to do something. And they said, we want to do something like we do in all of higher education, because the other uniqueness about American higher education compared to the rest of the world isn't just that we play sports. That is very unique. The other thing that's unique is the way we control and govern higher education in America. We don't have ministers of higher education. We don't have the federal government telling us how to run Daemen University, or even the University of Buffalo, even though it's a state institution. We get to decide those with boards of governors. And when we want to make assessments about quality judgments, whether a university is good enough or bad enough, we have peer review through the accreditation process. We have this system by which we who are in higher education make the decisions about what will or won't be taught and what will or won't be considered valuable in an academic experience. And so these presidents, naturally enough, said, we will do this ourselves. We will take control of it. We don't want government to run sport. We want to exercise self-governance and self-discipline over these sports. And they created the NCAA, a system by which they would get together on a regular basis, the university presidents, their heads of athletics, which soon became athletic directors, some of the leaders on their teams, and they'd come together at least annually, and they'd sit down and they'd say, what are the rules that we're going to play by? How are we going to make sure that this is safe? And they came up with a handful of fundamental principles. They said, first of all, this has to be about students at our universities playing other students who are actually serious about getting a degree in college. They are our students. They're going to college, and they're going to play each other. Second, they said, we have to craft rules that protect the health and safety of our students. We can't have them being injured like this. We can't have them being hurt. We bring them into our campuses and send them out into the world to make them stronger and better, not broken, physically or mentally. And then third, we have to have a system that makes sure that it's fair competition, that everybody plays by the rules, that the relationship between the school and the athlete is fair. Now, what's happened since that time in 1906 when it finally came together and they put all those principles together? Those 65 schools now have grown to 1,100 colleges and universities. 1,100 colleges and universities. The original handful of teams have now grown to 19,000 NCAA teams. And the original number of athletes is now 475,000 student athletes. Gary and I were joking about it, I love to make the comparison between the NCAA and the NBA. The NBA has 30 teams, we have 19,000 teams. They have 30 owner groups to make decisions. We have 1,100 universities and colleges that get together and make decisions. They have about 450 athletes playing in the NBA at the highest level. We have 475,000 of them. And the traditions, though, have continued throughout that whole period. The tradition of trying to make sure that this is focused on these young men and women trying to get educations, first and foremost, trying to make sure that their health and well-being is taken care of, and trying to make sure that the system is fair. And it's still governed by the member universities themselves. It's a very complex governance system, to say the least, to get 1,100 university leaders together. It's hard to get a faculty senate together to make a decision. I get to work with 1,100 university presidents, 1,100 faculty athletic reps, 1,100 athletic directors, senior women's administrators all across the United States who, across the 3 divisions of the NCAA, have representative governance systems and make all the policies and all the rules. You know, it's interesting, you'll read media accounts occasionally that'll make the NCAA sound a lot like the NBA or the NFL or something else. Couldn't be further from the truth. It's the exact opposite. It's much more like the United Nations than it is, for better and for worse, than it is, you know, a unitary system like the NBA or the NCAA. So we have university leaders. Dr. Olson's one of them. 16 university presidents who form something called the Board of Governors. They come from big schools, little schools, across the spectrum of American higher education. They oversee the 3 divisions who meet separately, come together with student athletes. They sit down and they figure out what all the rules should be. And it works its way through a very complex legislative process to produce the rules by which college sport is played. And it leads me back to this interesting system of, well, how well is that working? You know, if our focus is and needs to be, but often we lose sight of it, but if our focus is on those 3 things, what's going on? Well, if you look at, first of all, this has got to be about helping student athletes have academic success. This has got to be about the opportunity to get a great education at one of our universities or colleges. Well, the fact is, as we've heard, student athletes in Divisions 1 and 2 at virtually every university in America, at virtually every Division 1 and 2 college in America, have higher graduation rates than do the non-athletes at that same institution. The graduation rates are significantly higher for women and for students of color on those campuses. And if in, for example, Division 1, where 15 years ago there were some very difficult graduation rates in things like men's basketball, we've seen graduation rates rise higher in those fields than anything that I know of as an educator. up 33% in some cases over 15 years for African American Division I basketball players. Today, a Division I women's basketball player, women's athlete who happens to be African American has a 13% graduation rate higher than if she wasn't an athlete. And you heard in Division II for Latino women, Latina women's redundant. For Hispanic women, it's 12 percentage points higher if they happen to be an athlete versus not an athlete. The support and structure that universities provide student athletes today around their academic success has never been higher, and it works really, really well. Now, do we have problems still? Absolutely, a ton of them. We know that, in fact, I was chatting with your athletes today about it. We know that they don't have as much time as they'd like. They don't have as much time to take full advantage of everything that this university or any university has to offer. It's hard for them to do internships. It's hard for them to do study abroad. It's hard for them to get ready for life after college sometimes because of the demands of being a serious athlete and a serious student. Some of them have to modify their major that they might pick to find one that fits in with their schedule. All of those things are things that we need to fix, and we're working very hard on them. And indeed, Division II, that Daemen's a part of, is leading the pack in those developments, and we're really pleased and proud of that. But we've got a lot of work to do there. We got to make sure that we're providing students with everything that they need to be successful as students, because that's what's going to change their life. Secondly, on the health and well-being side, we've made obviously stunning strides from 1905, when people were literally being killed on the football field in large numbers. And when you look at the training support and the medical support that student athletes get today, it's extraordinary in most cases. But that doesn't mean that everything's done or perfect. Far from that as well. The NCAA and all of our member schools have a huge obligation, a moral obligation, I would argue, to make sure that we're doing everything with our rules and policies and practices to incorporate the best medical science we possibly can get into the way we make decisions and the way we set rules. So we just had a set of meetings just literally last week in Indianapolis. All 3 divisions were in town, the Board of Governors were in town, and adopted new football practice guidelines for the game of football across all 3 divisions, based upon the newest research that we're leading the charge in conducting. So right now, the largest study in history on concussions being led by the NCAA and the Department of Defense, $30 million research project so far. It'll cost a lot more as we go forward, to really start to understand concussion and to lead medical science, because there's way too little understood about medical science. That's not just a football problem. It's also a soccer problem. It's also a problem for kids who ride bicycles. By the way, the leading cause of concussion in America among young people are bicycle accidents. It's a problem among the Department of Defense, because the 18 to 22-year-olds that are in the military happen to be the same age as our college students, and they have lots of accidents and injuries, some related to the battlefield, most not, around concussion. But we don't understand the science. We've got to get that done and understood clearly. And in the meantime, we have to err on the side of caution. So we just changed football policies around that. We have to lead more research around other areas that we don't fully understand. Rest and recovery and what people call periodicity. Are we giving athletes enough time to rest between competitions and workouts? What's the impact of the current youth sport climate, where kids are playing one sport from 8 years of age until they go to college, 12 months out of the year, and are wearing out body parts before they even get to college? How many of you actually remember who Tommy John was? This is an old guy's question, right? So the old guys remember, so there's something called Tommy John surgery, named for a real man, Tommy John, that was performed on his elbow, and it was designed for saving the worn-out throwing arm of a worn-out major league pitcher. Okay? That's why it was invented. Last year in the United States, half of all Tommy John surgeries were performed on high school kids. On high school kids. Because they're throwing the ball so much, so early, so often, so hard, that they have arms that look like worn-out major league pitchers of 20 years ago. We need to understand that. We need to figure out, how do we help young men and women, girls and boys, be better athletes, stronger athletes, but without all the issues that causes. The other thing that we're finding that we've got to get our arms around is a whole array of mental health issues. We know that regular students showing up right now on all of our campuses, not athletes, everybody, that are showing up on our campuses. Again, big campus, small campus, doesn't matter, everywhere in America. They're showing up with more issues around mental health concerns, and they're more than happy to talk about it than we've ever seen before. And universities and colleges are all struggling with how to provide services and support. Well, student athletes are no different than everybody else. And indeed, it's a little harder sometimes to get to those issues in athletes because they've also grown up in a culture where you don't admit pain or difficulty. You never want to say, Coach, I don't feel good. You never want to say, Coach, I hurt. You never want to say, Coach, I'm depressed. But we know that's an issue because when we talk to them privately, they all say it. Well, we got to understand that. We got to help them with those issues. We're working hard on identifying, diagnosing, and getting tools to universities and colleges around those fronts. We've made great strides in health and well-being. We're making more strides as we speak, but we still got a lot to do on that front. And then finally, the whole issue of fairness that began back in 1905, we've made a lot of progress there as well. We've made a lot of progress in the most fundamental issue of fairness, and that's the relationship between the student athlete, and his or her university. Making sure that when a student comes to a school, whether it's this one or another, it doesn't matter, but when they go to school, that they're going to get actually what they thought they were signing up for. The school's delivering on its commitment to say, look, we want you to come to our campus to be the best volleyball player you possibly can, and we're going to do everything in our power that's within our resources and our means to deliver on that. Well, are they? And similarly, the student athlete has to make commitments too, saying, look, I'm going to behave myself. I'm going to be a real student. I'm going to follow the rules. I'm going to be a good citizen, and I'm going to be a part of this community that you're going to be proud of. And we've changed a lot of rules over the past 5-6 years to make those relationships look better and safer and work well for others. I'd be happy to talk about it in Q&A, but that world has changed pretty significantly, especially in Division I, but also in Division II, where they've modified the time commitments that student athletes have. They've changed the number of competitions that students have to compete in. They've made this look a lot more like life in the balance, and that's been absolutely terrific, and Division III is working on it as well. That's all great, and we feel good about it. We've got a little more to do in some of those areas, but we also have to be attentive to what are we doing with student athletes, especially about the time demands, especially are we making sure that the expectations that are being placed on them make sense, and that they are understanding fully what they're getting into and they feel great about it and that it's fair. We've done a nice job, a really nice job over the years of working on fairness between institutions, making sure the playing rules are the same, trying to get officiating the same. I know when you lose a game, it's because we didn't get an official trained right. I know that. That's a given. But, well, usually. We don't train the refs, by the way. But nonetheless, you know, we have those issues to deal with. And we work really hard on making sure that schools are rewarded for following the rules and that people aren't rewarded for breaking the rules. And indeed, they're sanctioned when it's appropriate. That system is working pretty darn well, and we're pretty pleased with that through this shared governance model that we have. Now, the interesting thing that the last thing I want to talk about before we move to questions is that we're seeing now this fascinating phenomenon where the rest of the world is really paying attention to college sport in America. I can't go anywhere internationally, and I know a lot of my university president colleagues that are here and university leaders that are here have similar experiences. You go overseas, you wind up talking to them, sooner or later one of the presidents or somebody else says, so tell me about this sport thing. I'm not sure I fully grasp this sport thing. What in the world are you doing in America around sport? Because it doesn't make sense to them completely. But they know that we like our universities and we're attached to them emotionally, viscerally. We know that Americans are very philanthropic and we actually give money to our universities, and that strikes them as odd. In fact, it almost never happens overseas. They know that we send our sons and daughters and cousins to our alma mater. We try and talk people into going to our school so we can get them there and we can all wear the family sweatshirts and have family reunions without fighting about who's going to win the next football game or basketball game. They see that, and then it also comes in one really interesting facet that surprised me when I took this job, even as a lifelong educator. I've had ministers of education say things like this to me. Look, we know we can educate people in the classroom every bit as good as you. In fact, maybe better. And in some cases, they may be right about that. But they also say, we know that your graduates are better leaders, they're better innovators, They're better risk takers. They're better communicators. They're more resilient. They're willing to speak up and take charge of things. We know they're better at teamwork. We know that those things are really, really hard to teach in the classroom. We know you can teach them on a field or on a court. And we think that part of the secret sauce of America is that your students have participated, probably since they were this big, in organized sport in a fashion that the rest of the world does not do. And that, they think, gives them a competitive advantage. And now they want to talk to us. And they want to talk about, well, how do we get that? How do we do that? Japan right now is talking about creating the Japanese Ncaa. In August, I'm going to be going to the World University Games in Taipei. In the spring, I was at the European University Games in Croatia. They're all trying to figure out, how do we emulate in ways that support our students what you're doing in the United States? They think it's good for young people. They think it's good for their institutions. They think it will help their students have competitive advantages that they see in our young men and women when they leave. And that ultimately is what this is all about. It's about providing young men and women with an opportunity to play the sport that they love at the highest level they're capable of or want to play at. Doing that in conjunction with getting an education, because if they don't get that part done, they've lost this great opportunity, and then sending them out into the world happier and healthier and better prepared than when they came in to our universities. That's the business we're in. You know, when you look at a big high-profile game, our March Madness championships, the Final Four, the College Football World Series, the College Baseball World Series, the College Football Playoff Championships. The games are big and they're bold, but everybody forgets that at the end of the day, those are students playing against other students. And that's what we care about. And if we stop doing that, then we've lost college sports. So with that, let me pause, and is somebody's going to take questions? Okay. We're just going to take questions. And I'd be happy to answer questions on anything I talked about or anything else that's going on in college sports today.
We're going to start with that side of the room, so we're going to give the microphone to anyone on that side of the room. Okay, so Dr. Emmert, when I walked in today, I noticed a really large contingent of student athletes from the State University of Buffalo. It's good to see them.
Could you all, guys all wave?
Okay.
All right, wow, great.
So,
Go back.
I'm going to get ahead of this one a little bit. I know that the young men and women from the UB swim team, and they have taught my children swimming, and my children have attended their swim camps. I didn't know they'd be here today, but they're hurting a little bit because their sport was cut. So I was wondering if you could just speak a little bit about your opinions on that and anything the NCAA can or can't do, because I think that's what they'd like to ask you today.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, I know your president. I don't know your current athletic director. I know your former athletic director well. And that tells me that I know how hard any decision is that reduces opportunities for their students. I've had to do that as a university president. I've had to lay people off during the recession. I had to eliminate a swimming program because I'd laid off 550 people in the university. It was a brutal time. So the last thing I'm going to do is second guess people that have to make hard decisions. You know, whether it's in a academic setting or the athletic department, universities have to make very hard decisions about where they're going to spend resources. And so what the NCAA has done is it's said consistently for, I don't know, 2 decades, I guess now, maybe more, maybe 3 decades, that a Division I athletic program like yours and a Division II, they both have thresholds of the number of sports that need to be represented, both men's and women's sports. So there's a floor level that says, look, you have to have at least 16 sports to be a Division I program, and you can't go below that. And the idea is to make sure that you've got a rounded set of programs. Now you can, there's schools that have 32 sports, right? By the time you add up everything, and so you can compete as a Division I school at any one of those levels. You have to have a floor. So the association, meaning all the Division I presidents, have all agreed that that's the floor that they want to set. They've re-examined that from time to time, but frankly, they've never talked about raising it up and saying you have to participate in these sports, but they have always held it steady at you've got to have at least 16 sports or you're not going to be Division I. The other thing that the NCAA does in all of that as an organization is it distributes money. So what's going on with money right now in college sports is that there's a rapid increase in the total amount of money going into college sports, but it's very unevenly distributed. So what most people don't understand the NCAA's role with money. So the NCAA itself, as an entity, only generates revenue from its national championships that it runs. We run 90 national championships, and we get to sell the media rights to those championships and tickets to those games, right? So we run 90 of them. Of those 90, financially, there's only one that generates revenue, positive, real revenue, only one. That's the men's basketball tournament. Now, the good news is the men's basketball tournament generates a lot of money. That 1 2-week event, 3 weeks by the time you put all of the wrap all the stuff around it, generates around $800 million. It's huge. In ticket sales and media revenue, it's monstrous. So then what do we do with that to try and help athletic departments? Well, first of all, the first half of it is taken right off the top, and it goes out to all the schools in Division I. There's a distribution formula. It's divided among the schools, and so it just goes, it's a pass-through that goes right back to all the Division I schools. 8% of it goes off the top and goes to Divisions II and Division III. Straight cash goes to them, but they use it to run their championship components, mostly. Odds and then other things, but mostly run their championships. And then there's another about 125 to 150 million that's used to run the other 89 championships, because as wonderful as a tennis championship is, there's no revenue associated with it. It's just a championship that we run, and that's great. We run 3 of them, all 3 divisions, men's and women's, so there's 6 championships. And we run those, pay for all of the travel and everything goes along with that. We run all of the governance structure out of that. We take $100 million off the top, and it goes back to Division I athletic departments for student supplemental support funds. So there's a $100 million pool for athletic departments to use to support their students, either in tuition grants or miscellaneous expenses or anything that the universities want. So that leaves around 4 to 5% that's used to run the administrative overhead of the national office. So the vast majority of it is a pass-through back out to the members. And that money, departments, athletic departments, for a lot of athletic departments, that's a huge part of their budget. When you look at what's happening with the rest of college sport, the 5 big revenue conferences, the SEC, the ACC, the Big Ten, the Big 12, and the Pac-12, those 5 conferences also get very large amounts of money from the football playoffs and the bowl game system. College football money never comes to the NCAA. People always ask me what we're doing with the football money. It never comes to us. It stays with the conferences directly. The other 5 D1 conferences, including the MAC, gets a piece of that, but it's disproportionately lower. So the huge growth that's occurred has occurred in those 5 big revenue conferences, and it's all football money that doesn't get redistributed, right? It stays with those schools. And their conference offices. Doesn't come to us, doesn't get redistributed among the rest of Division I. What that's done is it's allowed some budgets to rise rapidly. $150 million some budgets are now for some big programs. And there's other Division I programs that are operating with $7 and $8 million programs, budgets, and everything in between. We were joking, this odd distribution of money comes out in an odd way. So we just saw a new contract for the football coach of Alabama. His annual salary now is bigger than the athletic department budget at this university, right, to put some of that in perspective. So every athletic department's got to say, all right, we're in the MAC. We get this amount of money from our media contracts. We get this amount of money from our programs. How are we going to use it? The NCAA distributes the piece that we get, the men's basketball tournament money, to the MAC and to everybody else, and it goes out, and then your ADs have to sit and say, what are we going to do here? How are we going to make this work? So that's the hard choices that they have to make. And I'm sorry that those things happen. I really am. And I'm sure you're bitterly disappointed. I'll have the people with microphones do the vetting.
I think it was Northwestern University that years ago attempted, the student athletes attempted to unionize. Do you see something like that?
Yeah, so what happened in Northwestern was a group of football players signed union cards. The details are important, that's why I'm walking through it, and some people may know nothing about this. Signed union cards saying they would like to have a union vote. Now, Northwestern's a private university, not a public university. Labor law is split between public and private. This is more information than you want to know, but the National Labor Relations Board, the local regional guy in Chicago looked and said, yeah, I think they can unionize. In other words, he said, yeah, they look kind of like employees to me. And so they held an election. The election was sealed, and we never will know the outcome of that election. So we don't know whether the students said they wanted to or not. That's will never be known because they've now been burned, or whatever they do with leftover ballots. Because it then went to the National Labor Relations Board at the national level, and the national group, 5 individuals that oversee the Labor Relations Board, said, no, you can't unionize. They said it's mostly because it would be utterly impractical, and unionization makes no sense in college sport, and we could talk about why that's the case if you want. But more recently, since then, so the answer was no, there's no ability to unionize. It doesn't make sense in the American legal system. Then since then, we've also had a number of legal cases come forward around whether or not the fundamental question is, are student athletes employees or are they students? And this is a really important philosophical question, as well as legal one, as well as practical one. There are folks, and we've all heard them advocate it, there may be people that agree with this in the room, and I can understand your point of view. I disagree, but I can understand it. Will say, look, student athletes ought to get paid a salary. $50,000 is a common number you hear about, and I've heard Jay Billis say $100,000, and pick a number. They're all made up numbers. There's one fellow that's suing the NCAA right now that says there should be no limit. If Alabama wants to pay a quarterback $250,000, good for them. But let's think about this for just a minute. If you said that any university is going to hire a football team, by the way, there would only be a football team, any men's basketball team. The other sports would be eliminated because you couldn't afford to have them, nor would you consider employing people for a salary for something that doesn't generate any revenue, because now you've just made it a business, right? So if you're no longer recruiting students to come to your school to play football, now you're hiring them to be an employee, right? Because if you're paying somebody $100,000 a year, that is an employee. Make no mistake about it, there's no legal way to describe that person as anything other than an employee. So you're paying them $100,000, you're recruiting them to hire them, and you hire them. Why in the world would you hire an 18-year-old? I know that sounds silly, but if I'm paying somebody $100,000 to play football for me, why wouldn't I get somebody out of the Canadian Football League? They make about $50,000 up there. They're 28, 30 years old. They're pretty good players. Why in the world would I hire an 18-year-old? If they're an employee and they're playing for my team, my university, and 4 years goes by and I say, okay, your 4 years are up now, they'd say, you can't fire me. I'm an employee. That's age discrimination. I'm still a good quarterback. You can't get rid of me. And they win, right? It's a completely different relationship. Why in the world, if you had an employee, if the employees at Daemen are working as employees, do you mandate that any of your employees take calculus? You don't mandate that they're students. Why, if I'm paying somebody $100,000 to play football, why would I want to waste his time with school? He's my football player. I don't care if he goes to school or not. Right? He's not a student anymore. He's an employee. Most university leaders have said, these are about students. This is all about students. They're not employees. So the legal debate has been, which are they? So there's been 3 cases now, where student athletes have filed, lawyers who found student athletes, have filed suits against the NCAA and schools, individual schools, and said, we need to be paid the minimum wage under the Fair Labor Standards Act. And in 3 different court districts, now federal court districts, the courts have said, you're not an employee, you're a student. Stop, go away. We've had cases where people have said, look, I'm on TV. I have a legal right to my name, image, and likeness on TV because that's my image on TV. There's no court in the world, in America, that's ever ruled that anybody who shows up on a live broadcast is owed anything. If you'd have to do the band, the cheerleaders, the people in the stand, the guy who paints his face up crazy. I mean, and so the courts just recently ruled about 18 months ago, no, there's no law like that. You can't invent a legal right for a live broadcast when it's never existed in American history. So there's a whole series of laws, legal arguments now, besides the philosophical ones that just say, look, the relationship is these are students. Now what has happened is the courts have said the NCAA can't restrict a university from giving anybody anything that's tethered to their education. So you can't constrain what a student athlete gets that's a legitimate educational cost, right? And that's been, and I actually completely agree with that. And I don't agree that it's an antitrust violation, but I agree that's where the law should be. I mean, the rule should be. There's not going to be, there will continue to be people that argue that student athletes should be paid employees, but I haven't seen a university that wants to do that, and I haven't seen a legal structure within which that's likely to occur. If people want to form minor league sports teams, I think that's great. Form minor league sports teams and go play. I don't think any student should be forced to go to college to be a professional athlete. That's my own view. Some disagree. But, you know, if you're a tennis player, and I know there's probably some tennis players in the audience, and you want to skip college and go play in the LPGA, no, that's golf. Golf, if you're a golfer and you want to go play in the LPGA, you don't need to go to college, go play. Who cares? Great. That's why I hate the one and done rule. That's the NBA's rule. Those rules are the NBA's, not ours. I think if somebody's coming out of high school, they're good enough to go to the league, go. Don't make somebody go to college that doesn't want to go to college. We want people that want to be in college. Sorry, I turned that into a sermon. I apologize. Oh, no, but I can stay a little bit longer. Sorry. I'll answer more briefly. Yeah. Yeah.
So that's the men's program.
Yep.
Recently, this decision came really suddenly with disregard to current students and the incoming student athletes. Meanwhile, the university was soliciting donations and recruiting new student athletes to come to the university. My question for you is, is this the type of way that in the NCAA that you would like to see programs cut, or is there a better model? As modeled by NCAA, as to how institutions should make programs to get to that, because the sub-nature of this is certainly not fair.
Yeah. Look, I understand exactly what you're saying, and it's again, when we say the NCAA, we mean all the other universities telling each other what to do. In this case, I don't know what the details were in this particular case, and frankly, it's not my place to offer an opinion on it. I can tell you, again, from my own experience, having literally had to cut a swimming program, which was one of the least pleasant things I've ever had to do. We worked really hard to, first of all, make sure that if anybody wanted to transfer, well, first of all, we said we're honoring everybody's scholarship. You don't have a swim program, but you want to stay in school, we're honoring the scholarship. Second, we worked really hard to make sure that if somebody wanted to transfer, we would help them get into programs. Some of them went on to programs and had actually really nice careers in the Pac-12. We worked hard to make sure the coaches, because we had some very good coaches, one who'd only been there, I think, like a year, got good placements, and we worked hard to help them in their transition, both financially and And even having done that, I'm sure the students, in our case, felt like we just yanked the rug out from under them. I don't doubt for a minute that they were as angry and frustrated and sad as you are. And I hear you loud and clear. I'm sure there are better and worse ways of doing that. Again, I'm not going to opine on what's gone on at Buffalo. I think having to make those decisions just stinks. And nobody that I know ever likes taking away opportunities, especially from students. It's a crummy place to be. But again, having had to make those hard decisions, I get it. And I think you've kind of raised an interesting question that I think we meaning the Board of Governors ought to actually talk about and say, look, when these things happen, what do we owe our students? And I don't think the association, there's ever been a conversation like that, but I think you've raised a really good point, and you've got my commitment that we'll have that conversation. Won't change your situation, but it might change it going forward.
Well, I hope you do. And, I just want to say that, you talk a lot about opportunity, and certainly opportunity for
I want to thank you so much for your time. I really do. Dr. Emmert does need to get on a plane. I've missed so many planes that I want to
There was one question clear in the back. I'll take. Yeah, you can just stand up and shout. It's fine. Yeah, the answer is I don't know. It's a good question, and I've talked to some of your colleagues around here about that because I don't have any details on the law. It sounds like it's more complicated than what the press releases might suggest, and so it's unclear to me. I know that in some sports, if you have a big, broad scholarship policy, there was some elements kind of like that when I was in Louisiana at LSU. It provided more opportunities for students who played in sports with partial scholarships because you could get a tuition grant, right, and then you could layer a partial scholarship on top of it, and so it gave them more advantage. It made it easier for the in-state schools to hang on to the in-state kids because they could literally provide them with more support for baseball or other partial scholarship sports. But I really can't offer an intelligent opinion because I just don't know enough about the law. Okay, one last question. This lady here has been patient. She's been... And then if we miss the plane, then we're going to sleep at your house. So this is just letting you know.
Try to make it quick. Let me recognize and commend the NCAA for the strong stand that was taken in North Carolina with regard to the bathroom bill. And as you know, the replacement legislation, so-called, is still regarded as unfriendly to gender orientation. And the NCAA has been criticized for prematurely, lifting its, ban activities. How do you respond to that, and how do you see the NCAA going forward to continue standing strong for LGBT rights in North Carolina and elsewhere?
Yeah. Well, first of all, those kinds of decisions, that particular decision, and all of them like them, are made by our Board of Governors, with me as their partner in it. That means President Olson was one of those who I was personally very proud of in the positions that they were willing to take on this issue. HB2, we don't need to spend more time on it, but it was the most pernicious of the state laws that are out there around gay rights generally, LGBT rights in a number of ways, and so when North Carolina repealed it and replaced it with 142 or whatever the number is, we then again spent a lot of time with the board. The board spent an enormous amount of time looking at it, analyzing it relative to other states, because we have to look and say, okay, where is this relative to everybody else? Not do we like this bill, not is this something we're holding up as an exemplar and saying, oh, this is really good. It was it was actually, if we don't go back to North Carolina, would there be other states that we would also have to not go to? And it turns out there's a number of states that have bills on the books right now that are approaching that same level or more in terms of their restrictiveness. And so the board worked really hard to craft language that said to North Carolina, and this has all been public, look, you passed a bill that was just barely enough. And we're not thrilled about this. We're reluctantly going to come back, and we're going to continue to monitor through the experiences of our student athletes and our fans what goes on there. And if we have any reason to believe that you're diminishing opportunities or access in any fashion, then we're going to pull out all over again. They heard that loud and clear. The governor and I have talked about it countless times now, as have other leaders. There are people, of course, that are unhappy that we did that. There are people that are very unhappy that we pulled out in the first place. So we've got people on both ends of that spectrum that are not happy with us. But I was, again, pleased with the board. They made a difficult decision to pull out. They made a difficult decision to go back in. I do believe that absent the NCAA's actions, that bill, HB2, would still be on the books, I believe. That's just my speculation. So the association had I think, a very serious and positive impact. We've had, just again last week, a lot of long discussions about when and where does the association enter in on social justice issues, because there's no shortage of issues that we all probably feel strongly about one way or another. And we're trying to make sure that we understand, we, the board and I and our members, because not all of our members agreed either. We had 1,100 universities, some of whom were very angry that we pulled out. But we need to make sure that it's something that touches our core values and is directly engaged with sport, with collegiate sport. And our mission wasn't to just drive social change for its own sake, but to do what we needed to do to make sure that our students and staffs could have a quality experience when we hold events there. And we're convinced, the board's convinced, that we got far enough there that we can hold our events in a way that reflects our values. That's not to say that we think that law is exactly right for all the people who live in North Carolina. Everybody gets to decide that on their own. But we drove the change that was necessary for us to be back there. Some people find that satisfactory, some don't. But it was not easy. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak to you today. I really appreciate it. Thank you all. Good job. Thanks.